Welcome back to another deep dive. You know how sometimes you're scrolling through social media and something just stops you in your tracks, makes you do a double take?
Totally.
Well, we've got one of those right here, and it's all about this Instagram account you brought to my attention. SmartSchoolBoy9.
Yeah, this one's been making the rounds online, and it's definitely sparking some intense conversations.
Okay, so for our listeners today, we're going to try and unpack all of this, figure out what exactly is going on with this account, why people are getting so riled up about it, and what this whole thing might say about the state of online content these days. We've got a bunch of information here covering the account itself, the controversy surrounding it, public reactions, what Instagram's done about it, the potential dangers, and some thoughts on what actions folks can take.
Sounds like we've got a lot to dig into.
We do. So let's just dive right in. First things first. Who's the person behind this SmartSchoolBoy9 account?
Well, what we know so far is that it's an anonymous individual who frequently appears dressed as a schoolchild in photos and videos on the account.
Dressed as a school child.
Yeah, and we're not talking about just one or two pictures here. This seems to be the whole theme of the account, with all sorts of different outfits, often featuring school uniforms or, clothes that are typically worn by much younger kids.
Huh. I could see how someone might initially think it's just harmless cosplay. Like maybe someone experimenting with a certain aesthetic online.
Right, you'd think so. At first glance, it might seem like that. The internet's full of people exploring different personas and expressing themselves in unique ways. But this account has definitely struck a nerve with a lot of people, and the reactions go way beyond what you'd expect for typical online role-playing.
Okay, so let's get to the heart of it. What is it about an adult dressing up as a school child online that's causing such a strong negative reaction?
Well, the main issue seems to be the imagery itself. The fact that you have an adult choosing to present themselves in school uniforms and even taking on poses or behaviors that are usually associated with children or much younger students, this is what's making a lot of viewers feel really uncomfortable.
Yeah, I can see that. There's something about that image that just feels off to a lot of people,
Yeah,
especially I'd imagine for parents.
absolutely. Parents in particular have been voicing major concerns that this whole thing crosses a line, that it just feels instinctively disturbing.
Right.
And while there's no concrete evidence or information that points to any explicit harmful intent on the part of the account owner, the context in which this is all happening is really important.
Okay, so what's the context then? What are we talking about?
Well, the key here is that this content is being shared on Instagram, a platform with a massive user base that includes a huge number of minors. That's a central point of anxiety for a lot of people.
Makes sense. It totally reframes how you view the whole thing. It's not just happening in a vacuum. It's out there in the open for anyone to see. So what's the overall public response been like to this account?
Well, from what we've gathered, the reaction has been overwhelmingly negative. And it's not just a few isolated voices either. This is something that's being discussed and criticized pretty widely across Instagram itself and on other social media platforms like Twitter.
Yeah, I've seen some of those discussions online. What are some of the main worries that people are bringing up?
There are a few key concerns that keep popping up. First, many people simply feel that the content is just straight up inappropriate for the diverse audience that you find on Instagram. You've got people of all ages on there, and this kind of imagery just clashes with the typical mix of content that you'd usually see.
Yeah, it definitely stands out in a feed full of vacation pictures and, the latest food trends.
Exactly. And then you've got parents and online influencers who often have a more direct line of communication with younger audiences. They've been especially vocal about the potential harm this kind of imagery could have on young viewers. Some are even suggesting that the way this individual poses or the expressions they use could be interpreted as subtly sexualized, even if it's not overt, and that this could unintentionally normalize inappropriate behavior in the eyes of children.
That's a really important point. Even if it's not the intention, the potential for normalization is there.
Exactly. As one of the sources pointed out, the whole concept of an adult publicly presenting themselves as a school child is inherently unsettling to a lot of people. It raises questions about motivations and the potential influence, especially when you consider the impact on young minds.
And it sounds like people haven't just been talking about this. They've been taking action trying to get Instagram's attention.
That's right. There have been whole campaigns started by concerned individuals and online personalities to try and flag this account and get it removed. These efforts often cite potential violations of Instagram's community guidelines, particularly the ones that focus on the safety and well-being of younger users.
So with all of this public pressure and these concerns being raised, what has Instagram actually done about it? I mean, you'd think they'd be pretty quick to react in a situation like this.
Yeah, well, based on what we know so far, Instagram hasn't taken down the SmartSchoolBoy9 account yet. This is despite the huge amount of criticism and the numerous reports that have been filed against it.
Wow, that is surprising considering the level of alarm that's out there. What could be the reason for that?
Well, it probably comes down to the specifics of Instagram's content policies and how they're interpreting those policies in this particular case. You see, Instagram does have rules against things like harassment, abusive behavior, and obviously explicitly inappropriate content. But the tricky thing with this Smart Schoolboy 9 account is that while it's causing a lot of unease and raising red flags for many, it might not technically violate those specific rules in a clear-cut way.
So you're saying it falls into a kind of gray area for them.
Exactly. The content, while disturbing to many people, might not actually contain imagery that's overtly explicit or harmful enough to trigger an immediate policy violation. And this ambiguity makes the whole decision-making process a lot more complicated for Instagram.
Right, they have to balance freedom of expression with protecting their users.
Exactly. They've got to figure out where the line is between allowing freedom of expression, however questionable it may seem, and ensuring the safety of their user base, especially the younger ones. Think of it like traffic laws. Some things are obviously illegal, others are perfectly fine. But then you have those gray areas where interpretation comes into play.
I get it. So even though it's not a black and white violation, there's still a lot of concern. And you said people have been sending reports, right? They've been using the tools that Instagram provides.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Our sources say that tons of complaints and reports have been submitted to Instagram, urging them to take a closer look at this account and really evaluate it. And this whole situation has actually sparked a much broader discussion about what should be considered acceptable content on social media platforms, especially when you're dealing with themes that could be easily misinterpreted or, have unintended negative consequences for more vulnerable users.
This brings us to a really crucial question. What's the actual danger of content like this? Is this just a case of people overreacting, or is there a genuine reason to be worried?
That's the big question, isn't it? Well, it might be easy to dismiss this as just someone being a little strange online. The fact that this is happening on a public platform like Instagram, where anyone can see it, including children, that does raise some serious potential problems.
And what would you say is the biggest worry in that regard?
The potential impact on young audiences is definitely a primary concern. Like we've been talking about, Instagram has a huge number of young users who are still developing their understanding of what's appropriate, what's normal, and what their personal boundaries are. Seeing an adult role playing as a child in this way could be confusing for them. It could blur those lines in their minds.
Yeah, they might start to see something that's not healthy or normal as being okay.
Exactly. And then there's the very real concern about this type of content attracting predatory individuals. People with harmful intentions might be drawn to accounts like this, and that could create a really dangerous environment, not just for the account owner, but also for any other vulnerable users who might come across it or interact with similar accounts. That's a really disturbing thought.
Mm. It really highlights the responsibility that these platforms have to protect their users, especially the younger ones.
For sure. And many people are arguing that platforms like Instagram need to have much stronger and more clear-cut guidelines in place to protect vulnerable users from content that, while not explicitly illegal, could still be harmful or exploitative in more subtle ways. Our sources really emphasize the difference between harmless cosplay that might happen among peers and an adult presenting this specific kind of content on a large public platform where anyone can see it.
Okay, so let's say Instagram doesn't take the account down, and we're aware of these potential dangers. What can people actually do about it, both individually and as a community?
Well, there are a few important steps that can be taken. I think the first one is raising awareness about what constitutes boundary crossing or potentially harmful content. A lot of people might come across something like this and feel uncomfortable but not really know how to respond or even if their concerns are valid.
So it starts with educating people,
Yeah.
helping them understand why this type of content can be problematic.
Exactly. And then the second step is to actually use the reporting features that Instagram and other platforms provide. If you see content that makes you uncomfortable or raises any red flags, you should report it, even if you're not entirely sure if it violates their specific guidelines. Sending that report lets the platform know that this is something that needs a closer look.
So it's not just a pointless gesture. It can actually make a difference.
Absolutely. Collective action through these reports can really encourage platforms to reevaluate content, even in those more ambiguous gray areas. every report counts. And beyond that, parents and educators have a really important role to play here. They need to have open and honest conversations with young people about staying safe online and making sure they're consuming appropriate content. This means talking about the kinds of things they might encounter online, what might make them feel uncomfortable or confused, and who they can talk to if they see something that worries them.
Yeah, it's about giving them the tools to navigate this online world safely.
Right. We need to make sure that younger generations understand that just because something exists online doesn't automatically mean it's suitable or safe for everyone. And we need to empower them to identify these issues and take action when necessary. That's how we create a safer online environment for everybody.
So taking a step back and looking at everything we've discussed about this Smart Schoolboy 9 account, the images themselves, the public outrage, Instagram's response so far, and all of the potential risks, what stands out to you as the most important takeaway from all of this?
You know what's really interesting to me is how this situation highlights the real world tension that exists between individual expression and the collective responsibility we all share for safety online. This whole thing forces us to confront that blurry line between what might be considered unusual or unconventional self expression and material that has the potential to be genuinely harmful or disturbing, especially when it involves themes related to childhood and is so easily accessible to young people.
It's like we're constantly trying to figure out what's acceptable in these online spaces, and the rules are always changing. It raises a really important question that I think everyone listening should consider. In a world where online content and social norms are constantly shifting, how do we as individuals and as a society define and maintain those boundaries of what's acceptable, especially when it comes to protecting younger and more vulnerable users? It's something we all need to keep thinking about.
I agree. It's an ongoing conversation, and it requires all of us to be actively engaged with the content we see and the platforms that host it.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, that's another deep dive in the books. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.